Hello, my name is Anna Gritz and I'm a curator at KW here in Berlin. And I'm here together with Peles Empire to discuss the questions of motherhood and the arts, or maybe better, parenthood and the arts, or children and the arts, as part of the E-WERK series, The Artists as Consultants. And we want to thank Helen Turner and her team from the E-WERK to initiating this series and for having us. I was actually invited by Peles Empire, so I'm going to hand over to you guys.
Hi, I'm Barbara.
And I'm Christina.
And we invited Anna for this podcast because we are all three of us are mothers. I think that's, has to be said. And we just have been in a lot of discussions recently, and obviously all through from the start of being pregnant, I guess, and how it can work, how it does work in the art world and in the world, I think, as such, when you are suddenly more than just yourself.
Yeah, and we met in 2013 when I was pregnant, and Anna invited us to take part in a performance where we were
So I was working on a performance series around a piece by Stephen Kaltenbach called Modern Draperies, and I invited you, and I had no idea that you were pregnant. And I also, because I didn't have children myself, yes, had no idea about the implications that a pregnancy in a child might have for working as an artist. So it was fantastic to see you guys just work as normal, but I think that's something that is often presumed, that things just should continue as normal, but obviously they can't. So maybe it's quite interesting to hear how you guys set yourself up once you decided to have children and everything that followed.
I think before we dive in, maybe we should kind of say where we're gonna be heading with this conversation. I think in the beginning, maybe we talk about personal stories that we experienced when we were pregnant or had children. And then maybe we can also talk about what's, great and what made our life better with it. But also maybe it's good to then look into what could be improved, could be changed, and maybe if there's some kind of help or links for other people that have children, like how they could, get external help during that. So, but yeah, maybe we start from our personal experience. When I was then pregnant, and I think everything felt completely fine as long as I was just, by myself and with Barbara, and I could just operate as normal. But then when I had my child, I, in the beginning, took him along because he was still very small. But then I soon realized other people do not necessarily like when I take my child to an opening or gallery dinner. And I think then, I realized how naive I was maybe in the beginning, and that there is some consequences I didn't kind of envision in the beginning.
Yeah, I think it's sort of, you don't expect, I think as soon as you're pregnant, you kind of realize that people have so many opinions about it, that people are kind of like, suddenly you're like not a private person anymore, you're kind of like a public sort of entity or something, where people, it's not just like people feel like they're free to touch you, or they even say, oh, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. And once you've given birth, all of that becomes more extreme, I think. Then suddenly you're under this, kind of under this glass of being, I don't know. I think the mother is sort of, I don't know how to say it. I think the mother.
Well, there's something interesting about being asked to speak as a consultant, and actually my adversity to feeling that I'm an expert just because I had a child, because I can only speak from my personal experience. And there's so many experts around you as soon as you turn to have children, because everybody knows it better, everybody knows it different, and we all know that every situation is very different. So I think that maybe goes to support our claim that we're speaking from our own experience, but obviously you have to take from all directions, but never think that someone else actually knows better than you do.
I also think there's some kind of personal experiences you make that do kind of become relevant also on a bigger social scale. I think this is why it's relevant to talk about it. I think one of the first experience I had when I realized, it does become, a problem to bring my child somewhere was when we were invited to kind of give a talk at the Slate, and we're also invited to kind of, go around the studios and
just teach for a day,
basically. Yeah. And then I was told by the university, no, you can't come into the studio because it's not safe for the child.
And by that time, he was a little baby, he was like 4 months old.
Like I had him strapped to me. And I thought also interestingly that as a mother, you are then like the responsibility you should have and kind of the judgments you could make were kind of taken from you, that other people then judge on your behalf whether it's safe to take a child or not. I mean, obviously I wouldn't bring a toddler or, but I think like just that they, for security and insurance reasons, say you can't bring a baby. I thought, yeah, that was kind of off.
And then you realize that that every situation you meet is kind of has different rules. So it's always like you fall within their rules rather than as a person on your own, you kind of like navigate the world just on your own. But because we also did another day's teaching in Zurich, for example, where we taught with a baby on my breast the entire day, and that was not a problem, and that could be something that was something seen to be completely welcome to bring them along and to have them, which he was probably the same age that your child was when he was not allowed to come into the other school. Mm-hmm. There's just these things that suddenly you feel like there are so many other implications, and you start to realize that you being a parent is something that is seen as a sort of interruption, or as something that you have to justify yourself for, or that you have to come up with different ways of dealing with it. So we always brought along grandparents or partners or other friends that would help with the children when we're installing an exhibition or when we're going somewhere. I think that's definitely an experience that suddenly, as an artist, you always have to apologize for even being there in a way already. And then as a duo, you're like, oh, sorry, we're 2 people. Well, there's only 1 artist fee. And then suddenly you're like 5 people or 6 people or 7 people. And then you kind of always feel like you're invading. But that this is like a natural thing. And it's kind of a human right to have children and to, you always kind of feel like you're apologizing for something. And I do think that is very particular to the mother rather than the father. Because it is, I think it is, nobody, kind of assumes that the father would even bring their child along. And if they are, then they probably get applauded for it. But as a mother, you bring your child along and they're like, oh gosh, couldn't organize a babysitter or something like that.
And only recently we have, like, obviously we then always paid for it ourselves because we thought like we already, create this inconvenience of having children with us. But then like only later we realized, oh, maybe we should ask the institutions whether they would be able to contribute, in any shape or form. So how is it? How was it for you?
I can only sympathize with that. I felt the same. I was very, here in the institution, people were very welcoming when I was pregnant. Like they were doing all sorts of things so I could install until the 8th month 3 shows at the same time, and I could push things around. And similarly, I was installing with my small baby strapped to my breast. But I also felt there was, and that's something that I find interesting in general. That's Anina Power talks about it in her book, The One-Dimensional Woman, and it's about like, as long as you remain like an active worker and the job gets done, it doesn't matter who does it. So women are allowed to come in there and do it. But as soon as you become an inconvenience, things start to change. And that's very much my experience. I don't think I felt a lot of discrimination in terms of being a mother, but like a woman, but as soon as the kind of mother role starts to impinge. So I've been doing the same. I've asked, especially when I was still breastfeeding, to bring my child along and my partner, because actually I wouldn't have been able to do the jury work or the talk or the install or whatever it was without having them around. And mostly actually I've been met with support, but not always. And then you start to have to argue and always to have to ask for more. That it's always even a discussion that feels quite demotivating. But I guess that's just kind of the role that our generation has to play, so hopefully to make things easier later on. But also as an institution and working with artists that have children, it's actually by far not as easy to support them in the way that I would like to, because often their budget's actually there, but the way that budgets are thought of are always about the kind of sole agent. It's someone who can sleep in a shitty hotel, take the shittiest flight, take the flight early in the morning, take it back late at night, cost the institution as little as possible. And as soon as you have to kind of think of ways to move around that, so more people coming, or maybe even hiring a babysitter, because some female artists or some parents artists, I guess at the moment, they're still mainly the mothers. They don't need huge production costs, but what they might need is someone to look after their child while they're doing their work. So it actually doesn't change the budget at all, but often bureaucratic structures are just not set up to deal with these sort of inconveniences, even if they actually are not really an inconvenience. They're just a different way of thinking about artist production. And we've gone along with that for a while. I mean, people make immaterial art, people make relational art, and the institution had to catch up. And maybe now it's time to catch up to think about who's producing the work and the kind of support structures that they need to do it. And there should be grants to apply for childcare, or maybe just general specific childcare institutions for artists. And I think it's maybe even something that we have to think about that goes beyond childcare per se. Maybe it's just the kind of the social body, the private body that needs to have a space in the art world. And whether it's you take care of your parents, or you take care of yourself, or you have a mental health problem, or you, just generally maybe health questions, should find support and time and money in the question of how to produce work, how to show work, how to be an artist, how to be also a cultural worker. Because I find, maybe from my perspective, I'm in some ways more privileged because I do have statutory maternity leave. There are other people that could do my job when I'm not there. These are all things that freelancers and artists don't get. I guess in the exchange, you have a little bit more freedom in the way that maybe you set yourself up. You don't have working hours, you don't have to be necessarily in the office. So there are downsides and upsides to both things. But I think what is generally lacked is to acknowledge that there is a life beyond the job. And what really gets to me is when I see institutions putting on shows with, I don't know, artworks that thematize, whether it's discrimination or motherhood or other social topics, but then kind of in their own structure, they're kind of their own back body. None of that is actually taken care for. And obviously this is maybe much more a question for institutions and countries where there's less of a social welfare state, but still, even here in Germany, I find that there's still maybe too much of an understanding of how parents are supposed to look like, how children are supposed to be raised, who's supposed to take care of the children. And I think there just needs to be a much more equal playing field. And then if you choose to stay home, that's fantastic, and it shouldn't be discriminated in the same way that if you choose to go back to work really quickly, and both should be supported.
I think, one of the reasons why we did then leave London after having lived there for over 10 years is that, I was pregnant and realized I can't stay here. Like I wouldn't be able to move into a much bigger flat. I wouldn't be able to, pay for childcare that easily. Exactly. And I think this is we're totally aware that we're also in this Berlin bubble, which is also, I think, for German standards, very kind of exclusive, that it is fine and not kind of looked upon badly that you put your child in kindergarten when it's 1 year old, and that, that there is, childcare after school. I think even in other parts of Germany, people...
Childcare, which is free, only starts when they're like 2 or even older,
3,
which is the same as in the UK. It only starts when they're like, 3 or 4 when they go to school, basically.
Yeah.
And I guess you look to France, and there's even much earlier that you can put your child in care from 3 months on. And I think there are a bunch of other countries where it's so I guess we are lucky, but you want to think of a much wider art world. And I'm very lucky because I have a partner who really equally shares with me the childcare, and I don't think I would have been able to do my job otherwise, because I didn't get childcare right away from the moment when I was supposed to be back at work. We found other ways to get support through the Jugendamt, the youth services here, and they subsidized a private childcare for some hours, but it was never enough. So actually, I'm only going to have the childcare next week. So I'm very much looking forward to that.
I think it is also, I do remember, when you have a child, it is obviously, as an artist, you kind of keep working sort of throughout having children as well, because it is, you're not going to say no to a great opportunity or an exhibition you want to do, and things don't, you know, you can't take a year off or something like that. But I think I do remember that, yeah, when we were pregnant, that suddenly people were like, oh, you're gonna have a baby, how lovely, oh, you should, you know, kind of, now you have to lay low, and then say, my partner, who's also an artist, kind of saying like, oh, you're gonna have a baby, well, you need some shows to provide, you know. So really, literally, that exact attitude that you meet in a very liberal, you know, we consider our art world to be, you know, a liberal, everybody accepting everybody sort of field. But when it does come down to that, even people that you completely assume that they are exactly in the same mindset as you and stuff, there are these pre-assumptions. Yeah.
Absolutely. I had exactly the same experience that I mean, like colleagues of mine that are male, I don't think they have children in the same age, I don't think they probably would have been asked whether they feel like that would impede on them doing their job. And with a woman, of course, of a certain age, there's an assumption that they might want children, or that they will have children, and that they can't function or as easily function in the way that they were working before. There's obviously a pay gap that is apparent all around us. And I guess that goes more into a question of women in the arts more largely. It doesn't just affect mothers, but I wonder if it's partially resultant to the fact that a lot of women decide to become mothers at some point. And there is I think there are different kind of subjects that weave together, but I think if we could address this pay gap also on behalf of kind of people with children, obviously if in a relationship there's usually one person that earns less, it's often the woman that leaves the result that this person is more likely to stay home because there's less money coming in through that part of the profession. And I've seen this especially in the UK, where a lot of my friends were kind of forced in a more traditional kind of understanding of family with a woman being at home, because if they would go back to work, their entire income would be straight handed over to childcare, which I guess they have to do in order to stay in the profession, but that must be a really frustrating experience. And I think I looked it up, it's 25% generally in the kind of mid-20 teens of the representation of women in shows and in galleries. So obviously if there were less women that have galleries, there's less of a commercial aspect for female artists. There's less support to even think about having children, because I think there's also a mental leap that you have to do, that you can think, I can actually support a child, whether by myself or with a partner. And so it shouldn't come as a surprise that I think in general, overall, there are less artists deciding to have children, or people working in the arts at large.
I just want to read something out from the dictionary. If you put in motherhood into Google, you know, there was a sentence to, so motherhood, yeah, so there's the sentence to, you know, explain what it is. She juggles motherhood with a demanding career. Now let me read to you fatherhood, you know. The joys of fatherhood had softened him.
These are just the sample sentences that you get.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's crazy. No, that it's just, there's just no understanding at all that it should be equal for both. But I guess this goes back to the fact that you were saying having children is a human right, which I think is a really interesting question, and also I think is in part a problematic question, because often it's been seen more as a lifestyle choice. Oh, this person decides to have a child, that's their own thing, you know, it's as if you kind of decided to get a dog or a Porsche, it comes with certain responsibilities. But obviously we think of children being a larger good for society, and I still believe in that very strongly. But at the same time, of course, with overpopulation, this becomes a super complicated question. However, what I find really just encouraging is seeing that if we think of it this way, then of course this should be a question not just for parents and people that have children, but also for people that can't have children or don't want children, to be involved in questions around children and education and their presence in a professional field. But then from then, I think I would also like to take it back and think that we would have to make it much easier for people that don't fit maybe traditional stereotypes to have children. So I'm aware through friends that if you would like to get in vitro fertilization, for example, and you're two women, you have to pay. While if you are a married couple, you get subsidized by the state. Similarly, this affects people where I think one parent can't have children. Like, so it's very much an able-bodied male, female, married couple that gets support. And I think there we have to do a lot of work to extend the traditional concept of the family. Because as you said, you had your grandparents and other people to rely on for support. Like there are very little families that can actually function just between like two people and a child. You need a larger support system, and that doesn't have to be biological. It could be, I don't know, it always takes, like, it takes a village to take a child, and I still believe in that. And I would love for there to be, I mean, maybe more open understandings of a family structure, and maybe leaving it less in the kind of insular.
Yeah, and I think that something that should change as on an institutional level is that you have this kind of awareness that, you know, having children around and in the arts and bringing them along is kind of part of normal life, and it should be more kind of, you know, encouraged, and it should be more normal. And I think also that if you ask for extra money in order to, you know, bring support or whatever, that it's fine, that it's kind of calculated into the budget somehow. I think yeah, that there should be, you know, if you are in a position of power when you can actually decide on budgets, that you kind of look after that, but also like as an artist that you are vocal about it, and, you know, also have the courage to say what you need, that you kind of have this top down and bottom up process, and ideally you meet in the middle, that you actually make it possible that, you know, nobody is excluded from, you know, a show, yeah, to exist.
Yeah, to access this in whichever situation they are. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think there's a really skewed understanding of private and public in the art world, and we often praise ourselves by being like vocational, and we're doing a job out of a passion. And through that, I think the kind of work aspect of what we do is bleeding constantly in our private life, but there's very little room for it to go the other way around. So I think if we just understand ourselves as larger social bodies with needs that go beyond kind of to fulfill our job and might even inconvenience this kind of understanding of fulfilling a job, there would be it would be a much more generous and accommodating system. And you spoke about financial resources, and I think to me it seems like there's and this is maybe also partially due to the pandemic and a larger understanding that artists need a lot more support at the moment than they did before, but there seem to be more funding sources around than there used to be. What do you guys think? Are you feeling the same, or especially for parents maybe?
Yeah, I think there are a few more funding sources out there, but it is always temporarily fixed, let's say. You know, there are obviously scholarships and like other things, and there are some little bits you can apply for as parents in particular, which is really nice. But
there's also other residencies or other things where you would have a problem to apply as a parent, or
you're clearly excluded. Yeah.
You are then excluded. Yeah.
Yeah, that is really crazy to me, that you're not allowed to bring children or partners on a lot of residencies, because it really has this assumption that, I mean, obviously you're supposed to work, but it's not like you can't work at home either, and there you have a partner and a child. I mean, obviously it's not as easy as we've discussed, but that there's this assumption that you just are willing to leave your private life behind for like 6 months or a year and not bring people along. So I guess, have you been on residencies with your children?
No, not really, actually. Have you been on residencies with your children? No. It is very clearly that 95% of residencies, it's literally you have children, you can't come. So it's like this stage in your life, you should not be making artwork. Yeah, so that's often how it feels like. But then obviously you have a different setup. The children, you have to be more stable, and you have to have your childcare, everything needs to be set up. But if there was something already set up in a situation where you can have a residency, we would love to go somewhere.
Yeah. And I can only say that I've tried in the past, like doing talks programs that had childcare associated with them, so women could bring their children and attend a conversation or a symposium. And this was still in the UK, and it really wasn't that easy because there was all these questions around liability and insurance. But I think these were bureaucratic kind of impediments that could be overcome. It just would take a bit of advice from a lawyer, because there are a lot of workplaces that have kindergartens or something associated with them. So I think that would be already a really beneficial thing to have, even at institutions, some form of childcare during public programs, and then maybe extend that, the people that you use for those, for installation processes, or even just for the people that work there, I guess. And I guess it would take some research into that. Yeah.
It's just crazy how far we've come, you know, in society, without actually having a space for children at the workplace just as an automatic thing. Like, it's not like having children is something new. It's not like they're a minority. It's not like this has come about very recently that people have children. What do we do with them? No, this has always been the case, clearly, otherwise we wouldn't be here. So how is it possible that in every workplace children are alienated, every, you know,
and that it's not more fluid as well.
Yeah, exactly.
That you kind of create your daily routine or lifestyle in a more fluent way, that you can kind of take a doctor's appointment in the morning and, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how do children need special insurance? Oh my word, there's going to be a child there. But if somebody's drunk in the corner, they don't need special insurance, you know. It's
opening and
yeah,
opening.
Exactly. Yeah. But like a child,
you want the same right for children than for alcoholics in the art.
Nothing.
But I think this kind of attitude already, this kind of, you know, problematization of children already starts at an art school level. Like, I also know someone who studied at an art school and had a baby, and she was asking whether she could come back 50%. And like, even though it's a really kind of, you know, popular and very kind of woke and liberal art school, like, they were really kind of, it was really stressful for her to actually convince them that she could go back 50%. And I think there's other examples of also UK art schools that do have a kind of union-funded kindergarten, but it's really expensive, and then it was also closed for a while. So I think, again, then it comes back to private organization of childcare, and it's kind of a lot of struggle that doesn't need to exist. Like, it's also like, obviously women or, you know, parents are able to kind of organize all that, but it's, you know, it adds on the list of things they need to do in their daily life anyways. Like, it's stuff that can actually be easily taken up by, you know, a greater body.
Yeah. Well, it looks like that you guys found a way to organize yourself really well, despite all these problems that, or these challenges that having children bring. Can you think of like quite tactile facts that have benefited your practice having children?
You do. Yeah, I think being an artist duo has helped us hugely, obviously, if that's like that we are, and that we've been in the same situation like a year apart, and that we kind of understand each other's life and what our needs are. But
and also I think having children actually has made us even more motivated. Like, we have had so many shows since we have children, and I think like being in the studio early, like, I think just kind of the self-organization for our studio practice, I think in that case children have helped too.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it is a huge, for us also, it's a huge motivator, just kind of making more of everything, you know, and just being better hours. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Organized, and just knowing you're
responsible for other people as well. Yeah. And you have to make it work somehow. Yeah. But I think, yeah, what should be done by us maybe at the end of our conversation, that in the show notes or wherever that would fit, that we kind of list some things that we have found throughout our research that, you know, would help with funding, or kind of extra residencies for parents or mothers that, you know, would be interesting for others to look into.
Yeah. I think,
yeah, and maybe we just end with a call out to those that don't have children or don't want children, that they should see themselves as part of a system that supports children, and maybe be a little bit extra generous in the same way that everyone else should be generous to their social needs. And I also wanted to say that we decided to do this talk in English, although we both we all are native German speakers. So hopefully there will be some translation of this at the end, or alternatively, we are obviously also always available for follow-ups in the German language.
Thank you so much, Anna.
Thank you too.
Bye.
Bye.